Midterms are finally over, and our protagonist Ian Purkis couldn't be happier. He survived another round in the brutal academy. But while he celebrates with his friends, Celine Haster reminds him that the battle isn't over yet. One wrong step, and he could still be expelled. Leto Einstern, ever the realist, jokes that Ian's future might just be that of a low-ranking city guard. But Ian doesn't care. He made it through with his footwork and horse-riding skills, even if his swordsmanship is lacking. The night of celebration ends, and Ian stumbles back to his room, swearing never to take a morning class again. But as soon as he falls into a deep sleep, a chilling vision haunts him. An ominous voice whispers, "Delphirum is coming. He must be stopped." Jolted awake in a cold sweat, Ian brushes it off as a drunken nightmare. But when he notices an unfamiliar letter on his desk, things take an even stranger turn. The letter, written in elegant handwriting by Cephia, speaks of fiancés, hunting festivals, demonic beasts, and a dream shared across time. The date? A completely different year, one that doesn't even exist. At the end of the letter, if they don't protect the future, the world will end. Ian dismisses it as a ridiculous prank, crushing the paper in frustration. But as he rushes off to class, one unsettling thought lingers. Who would go through the trouble of writing him a love letter? A moment later, in the academy, he was walking quietly when he heard students around him whispering, warning each other not to lock eyes with him. They said he would try to talk to them and ask if he was the crazy one, the one from the rumors. He felt like everyone was staring at him and wondered why he had an axe at his waist. The realization made him feel awkward, and he questioned what the hell was going on. He then saw Leto and Celine and called out to them, which shocked both of them. However, they quickly turned around and acted as if they didn't see him. Leto whispered to Celine to ignore him and pretend she didn't know him. She agreed, adding that she didn't want to be dragged off to a strange place again. But then, he shouted at them, asking if they were even listening to him. Leto was surprised upon hearing his words but suddenly noticed something. He began to stare at him, scanning him closely, and muttered that something about him was different from yesterday. Frustrated, he shouted at Leto that he wasn't in the mood for that bullshit. But before he could finish his sentence, Leto rushed forward and hugged him with tears in his eyes. Leto shouted that the evil spirit that had possessed him had finally disappeared. He pushed Leto away, telling him to stop being disgusting and demanding an explanation. Leto replied that something strange had possessed him for the past week. Shocked, he asked Leto if he had really said a whole week, and told them the last thing he remembered was saying goodbye to them last night. Celine, now furious, asked if he truly didn't remember anything and reminded him that he had been treating them like servants for an entire week, ruining their reputation. Leto then told him that they would have taken him to an exorcist if he hadn't threatened them with an axe. He grabbed the axe at his waist and asked if that was what they meant. Celine quickly asked him to keep it away from them, saying she was getting traumatic flashbacks. Confused by everything he had just heard, he began to wonder if he had really been possessed by an evil spirit. But as far as he could recall, he hadn't been near any dangerous places or objects. That made him question whether it had anything to do with the nightmare he had. Leto then told him he was glad the spirit had disappeared, and Celine added that she was thankful it was gone before another incident happened. Stuttering, he asked them what they meant by incident, and whether he had done something. Celine responded that he had done something really crazy. He had beaten the second year's top student. Upon hearing second year top student, he immediately thought of the youngest aura expert, the one referred to as a monster swordswoman among the second years, Cereal Yurdina. Stammering, he asked if they were really saying that he had beaten a monster like her and if they were messing with him. But Celine simply asked why he was acting so surprised and reminded him that he had hospitalized her for an entire week. Shocked, he shouted that there was no way that had happened and asked what kind of evil spirit could have possessed him to make that possible. But Celine simply told him that they didn't know and asked what he planned to do about it. Confused, he asked what she meant, and she clarified that she was talking about swordsmanship class today. She then asked if he remembered that he was facing Saria again today, shocking him even more. A week ago, Saria Yurdina was down on the stage, crawling to grab her sword. She tried to stand up, muttering that it was unbelievable. She told him that before, he could never last more than 10 seconds against her, yet he had easily defeated her this time. However, Ian simply responded that what was truly unbelievable was her mediocre swordsmanship. He then slashed her in the face with his wooden sword, causing her to be thrown backward and slam onto the floor again. She tried to stand up once more, but before she could go any further, he slashed her from behind. The students watching murmured among themselves, questioning whether Saria hadn't been virtually undefeated, even against fourth-year students. They were shocked that Ian had won against someone like her. Ian then approached Saria and asked if she wasn't even a little suspicious. He told her that she had taken the bait at every small opening he had shown, without realizing that it was all a trap. Raising his wooden sword, he finished the fight with ease. Back to the present, Ian asked himself why, out of everyone, he had to fight someone in the same class as him. He thought that it would have been fine if he was up against someone he could actually beat, but instead, he was fighting the Academy's so-called unbeatable student, Saria Yurdina. Celine shouted at him, telling him to call it quits while he still could and just surrender. Meanwhile, the other students whispered about how persistent Saria was. They remarked that she had lost miserably, yet she still wouldn't accept it. Saria heard the students whispering that the professor had always covered for her because she was strong, but now they bet it had bruised her pride. Some even admitted that they would have felt ashamed in her position. The professor then shouted for everyone to be quiet and announced that the match was about to begin. He reminded them that the match would serve as a substitute for their class, meaning the outcome would be reflected in their grades. Ian cursed the evil spirit that had possessed him, complaining that it should have at least cleaned up its mess before disappearing. Instead, it had simply vanished after doing whatever it wanted, leaving him to deal with the aftermath. Now, he was left wondering what the hell he was supposed to do. He knew that Saria was the top student, so losing a few marks wouldn't hurt her. But if he failed this class, he would end up as a NEET living with his parents. Taking a deep breath, he calmed himself down, thinking that if he could just hold out until Saria was satisfied, 10 minutes should be enough. However, he was immediately shocked when she was instantly in front of him. In the next second, she slashed him, sending him flying and slamming him onto the floor. Within an instant, he realized that there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell he would last 10 minutes. He'd be in the hospital within 1 minute at this rate. Still, he knew that if he gave up now, Saria would never accept it. That meant he had to hold out a little longer. Determined, he stood up and asked if it was his turn now. Saria simply told him to do as he wished. Without hesitation, he dashed forward, jumped, and swung his sword in her direction. He was surprised when he felt his body moving with unnatural ease. It felt incredibly light, making him wonder what in the world had happened during the time he couldn't remember. His body was responding exactly as he wanted it to. As his slash neared Saria, she simply smiled, then disappeared in an instant. Reappearing at his side, she effortlessly disarmed him, knocking his sword from his hands. The next moment, she slashed him from the front, sending him crashing onto the floor once again. For a brief moment, he thought there had to be a way out of this. But then, he realized it was impossible. Saria stared down at him and asked if he hadn't shown her that opening on purpose. She then reminded him that just last week, he had brushed her aside so effortlessly as if he were toying with her. He angrily shouted at her to stop talking about last week already, saying he would lose his mind if he heard it one more time. She, however, furiously demanded to know whose fault he thought it was that she had ended up as a laughingstock. Without hesitation, she jumped at him, ready to strike down. He immediately raised his sword, confirming that both his kinetic vision and reaction speed had improved. However, it was a trap. She easily turned around and managed to slash him, sending him flying and slamming him into the stage corner. He saw her attacking, first from the side, then from below, and next from the front. But he knew that what it looked like was not the full picture. It was actually a continuous assault, and though it was a struggle, he was keeping up. He wondered why she was making so many unnecessary moves. She quoted what he said to her last week not to charge in just because he saw an opening. She added that assumed it was a trap, reminding him that he was the one who had told her that last week and explained that it was the reason she had asked for a rematch in the first place. Meanwhile, he was exhaustedly catching his breath. She then ran toward him, shouting if it wasn't about time he got serious. He suddenly understood that while his strength had certainly grown, Saria wasn't the same as last time either. Thanks to the words he had said to her last week, she was making more unnecessary movements in an attempt to prove herself. Saria dodged his slash and blocked his next attack. He managed to block her attacks as well as she pushed forward. He thought to himself that he had fought her equally for long enough now, so if he called it quits at this point, Saria wouldn't be able to say anything. She raised her sword and stated that now that he had finally gotten serious, it was time for her to show him what she could do too. He saw her attack coming closer and didn't move from his place, purposely taking the hit and slamming onto the floor. The professor then announced that if Ian didn't give up within 5 seconds, Saria would win. Lying on the floor, he thought to himself that both the possession and this duel with the top student had been the most unbelievable things to ever happen in his life. As the professor began to count down, Ian told himself that he had done what he needed to do to make amends and that it was time to become a normal person again. But then Saria spoke, asking if she was right in thinking that he had taken that hit on purpose just now. She told him not to think he could settle things like that, which shocked him. She then added that if he ended the fight like this, she would request another duel. Even if he refused, skipped class, or tried to avoid her, she would challenge him again and again until he had tasted the same humiliation she had felt. He grabbed his sword and stood up in anger, thinking about how he was struggling like hell right now over something he didn't even remember doing. He then wondered if Saria was seriously treating him like her archenemy just because he had messed with her for a single week. The professor told him that if he wanted to withdraw, now was his chance, then asked if he wanted to stop. Ian replied that he could still go on. The professor agreed and announced that the duel would continue. Saria praised him for standing up again and stated that they couldn't just let things end like that. He smiled, knowing that there was no running away now, and swore to himself that he was going to tear that stubborn pride of hers to pieces again today. He knew that during their last exchange, he had clearly seen the movements of her sword and had been able to dodge without any difficulty. This made him realize that all he had to do was focus. Glaring at her, he swore to completely destroy her pride. As she ran toward him to attack, he simply watched her sword, surprised to find that he could clearly see its trajectory and the timing of her swings. She then leaped into the air, launching a powerful strike at him. But just as her sword was about to hit, he grabbed it with his bare hand, shocking her. His golden eyes burned with intensity as he glared at her and told her that he had caught her. With ease, he threw her sword aside, making her stumble and drop to her knees. Raising his own sword, he declared that the match was over, leaving her in disbelief. She instinctively covered her head, trembling in fear, which stopped him in his tracks. He hesitated, questioning whether this was really the right way to end things. Was it even necessary to settle something from a week ago? He knew that this wouldn't truly resolve anything. Rather, the same situation would just repeat itself. With that realization, he stepped toward her, understanding that this was not about winning, but about addressing the real issue at hand. Instead of attacking, he flicked her forehead. She let out a sharp yelp of pain, and the entire crowd gasped in shock. Saria demanded to know what the hell he was doing and if he was mocking her now that he had won. But instead of answering, he simply asked why she was trying so hard to win against him. Clenching her teeth in frustration, she shouted that winning was everything to her. If she lost, she would become a laughingstock. He smiled calmly and asked if other people's opinions were really that important. Then, he told her that losing one match wouldn't change what people thought of her that much. No matter what they said, the effort she had poured into honing her swordsmanship wouldn't just disappear because of a single defeat. She stammered in response, reluctantly agreeing with him, though she still seemed hesitant. He continued, acknowledging that being mocked hurt, but if everything she had worked for suddenly became meaningless just because of one loss, it would be unfair. She nodded in agreement. He then told her that he had been losing all the time at the academy, so she should trust him when he said there was no point in taking other people's selfish words to heart. Even if she lost once and others laughed at her, nothing would truly change. She knew he was right. It suddenly dawned on her that she had unconsciously convinced herself that her swordsmanship was useless, even though it was something she had built with her own determination and belief. With newfound clarity, she calmly admitted that she had learned a lot and politely thanked him. The crowd remained confused. Celine asked if this meant that Ian had won, while others murmured in amazement that he had now defeated the second year's top student twice. Some wondered just who the hell he really was. Meanwhile, the professor was pleased that Ian and Saria had reconciled and officially announced Ian as the winner of the match. Ian stepped off the stage while Saria, watching him go, silently swore that from that day forward, she would walk her own path, no matter what others said, just as Ian had taught her. Days later, Ian realized that things didn't always go the way people wanted them to. As he walked through the academy, he overheard students whispering about him. They referred to him as the rumored Ian Purkis, and speculated whether he was the so-called demon who had nearly killed Saria in their first match before forcing her to admit defeat in the second. Frustration welled up inside him. He knew he had only won because Saria hadn't shown her full strength. It wasn't because he was actually strong. Yet, he had to acknowledge that his aura detection and mana control had improved significantly compared to before. Still, no matter how many unnecessary movements Saria had made, if his skills had truly been worse than hers, he wouldn't have been able to win in the first place. That thought made him wonder again. What the hell had happened to him in the week he couldn't remember? Suddenly, he felt a tap on his shoulder. A voice asked if he was trying to recall that missing week. Turning around, he saw that it was Celine and Leto. He sighed and admitted that in the end, he still had no idea why he had been possessed. Celine told him that she was sure he was fine because the saintess at the cathedral had said so. However, he disagreed, reminding them that there were strange rumors about him everywhere. She brushed it off, asking who cared about some stupid rumors, adding that they weren't even bad ones. Before all of this, he had been looked down on as a low-ranking noble, but that was no longer the case. She then shyly admitted that it pissed her off whenever she heard people saying he had a nice face, but wasn't that attractive because he was just a countryside noble. He responded that it still meant they liked him, but before he could say anything else, she stepped on his foot, making him scream in pain. She then told him that thanks to him, even the high-ranking nobles had stopped treating them badly because they were scared he might crush them. Leto then asked if the rumor was true. Ian, confused, asked what rumor he was referring to, reminding them that there had been more than just one or two rumors about him lately. Leto clarified that people were saying Saria had been following him around ever since that day. Celine, suddenly angry, demanded to know if Saria was really following him. He simply told them to look to the side, but not to make it obvious. They all glanced to the side and saw Saria hiding behind a tree, wearing a mask, blushing as she stared at him. Celine fumed, asking if Saria seriously thought that disguise would work. She then shouted at Saria, demanding to know why she was following Ian and if she had already forgotten getting beaten half to death by him a while back. Ian and Leto did their best to hold Celine back as Leto asked when Saria had started following him. Ian sighed and replied that it had been going on for about 5 days and that it was so annoying he felt like he was going to lose his mind. Leto quickly dragged Celine away, telling Ian to talk to Saria before she exploded. Ian reluctantly agreed. On the other hand, Saria was panicking, wondering what she should do. She knew she had to ask him as soon as possible, but before she could gather her thoughts, she was startled when he called out to her from behind. He told her that he had noticed she had been following him recently and asked if there was something she wanted to talk about. She quickly took off her mask in shock and asked how he had seen through her disguise, making him wonder if she actually believed it would work. Stammering, she shyly told him that she wanted to ask for his guidance because she wanted to become stronger. He blushed slightly, realizing that Saria had become much more polite compared to last week. But then, he wondered what he could even teach her. If they were talking about morals, that was a different story. But when it came to swordsmanship, there was nothing he could teach someone stronger than him. More importantly, he had finally gotten his normal life back, and he had no intention of getting involved with her again. He apologized, but told her that he would have to refuse. Her expression fell as she reminded him that he had won against her twice. He explained that it had nothing to do with his skill, she had simply let her guard down. As he turned to leave, he told her that the only reason he had won was pure luck, but she insisted that luck was also a skill. If he couldn't help her long term, then he should at least do it until the hunting festival. He froze at the mention of the hunting festival. The ridiculous letter had also mentioned it. That year, there had been several accidents during the festival, like Emma from the alchemy department, who had gone to gather medicinal herbs only to be attacked by a mysterious monster and found with her stomach ripped open. Saria hesitated before continuing, saying that there was no reason for him to help her. Before she could finish, he suddenly thanked her, realizing that he had remembered something important. He then turned and walked away, leaving her surprised and confused. As he left, he simply told her that if she wanted to get stronger, she should ask Professor Derek to teach her instead. Leto and Celine spotted Ian rushing off, and Leto asked where he was suddenly going and if he had settled things with Saria. Ian replied that he hadn't and explained that he had just remembered something else he needed to do, so he would see them later. Although he didn't believe everything written in the letter, the fact that his friend's name had been mentioned in it bothered him. He decided to check on her in person. Without wasting any time, he headed straight to the alchemy department, knowing that Emma would definitely have answers. Later, at the training ground, Saria was catching her breath as she repeatedly swung her sword in different positions. Professor Derek observed her and told her that it was good enough. She was almost there. He then explained that as long as she remained diligent, she should be able to form a well-rounded aura by the time the hunting festival arrived. Saria thanked him, and he laughed, admitting that he had never expected her to ask him for training. She excitedly responded that Ian had told her to seek his guidance, which confused Derek. A moment later, Saria suddenly snapped as she realized something. Regaining her composure, she calmly told Derek that she would be taking her leave, as it didn't seem like he had anything else to teach her. Derek smiled to himself, thinking that Saria still lacked social skills as always, and told her they would see each other in their next class. She simply nodded and walked away. The next day, Derek met Saria again and told her that there was no need to rush. He mentioned that even that guy had only managed to place second in the hunting festival during his second year. Saria replied that it was odd for a professor to tell her not to push herself when she was simply eager to improve her grades. Derek then offered her a hint since it was her first hunting festival. He advised her to familiarize herself with the terrain and monsters of the southern forest, as that was where the festival would take place. He was certain that the upperclassmen had already started doing so. Saria asked if there were any strong monsters in the southern forest. Derek explained that while there were hardly any near the entrance, once she made it halfway into the forest, she would start encountering much more powerful creatures. She acknowledged his words and said she would try to go deeper next time, but Derek warned her not to go too far alone. He further explained that although most students could handle the monsters, records showed that as the hunting festival approached, the appearance of terrible monsters became more frequent. At the time of creation, the heavenly god Ars was born alongside light, while darkness gave birth to the evil god Omelos. Together with the flow of time, the heavenly god created the universe, establishing the law that time moves from the past to the future. If that law were ever overturned, the world would be plunged into chaos. To preserve the order of time, the heavenly god placed several restrictions upon it. Thus, if any being could defy that order, it would have to be an enemy of the heavenly god, an immensely powerful existence, someone like Delphilim. Emma, a student from the alchemy department, leaned back in her chair and asked Ian if he finally understood. He sighed and admitted that he didn't get it at all. Yawning, Emma reminded him that he was the one who had woken her up, despite the fact that she had been up all night. Not only that, but he had also barged in, slamming the door open after not seeing her for an entire month, and then had the nerve to say something ridiculous like he was glad she was okay. Annoyed, she told him that he really needed to learn some common sense, and that he always lost track of everything once he became focused on something. Ian tried to defend himself, asking her to cut him some slack and reminding her that they were friends. But Emma simply scoffed, questioning what kind of friend only ever came to her when he needed something. Feeling guilty, he apologized and admitted that he knew he had woken her up. Then, noticing that she seemed even meaner than usual, he asked if she wasn't being a little too harsh on him. Apologizing again, he then asked if she could explain things a little more simply. Emma smiled at his flustered state and said that at least he had the decency to apologize. Relenting, she agreed to summarize it for him one more time. She first asked if he agreed that anyone trying to defy time itself would need an immense amount of power. Ian nodded in agreement. She then explained that there was only one being in the world with that level of strength, Delphilim, the servant of the evil god. Ian's eyes widened as he asked if she was saying that the letters he had received had been sent by Delphilim. Emma fell silent for a moment, staring at him in disbelief, before finally telling him that he seriously needed to develop some common sense. Frustrated, he shouted that she was the one who had said it in the first place. Sighing, she admitted that if she had to name someone, it would indeed be Delphilim, but she still couldn't understand how a mythical being, one whose existence wasn't even certain, could have done something like that. Ian, still deep in thought, then asked what if it was the evil god's doing. Emma shrugged and replied that they didn't even know if the evil god truly existed either. Ian awkwardly laughed, realizing she had a point. Emma grabbed a potion and told him that, in any case, it was impossible to receive a letter from the future. She advised him to go back to his room and make sure he wasn't being paranoid. Ian wondered if Emma was being a little too harsh, treating him like an idiot just because he had said something crazy. But he supposed he was just as crazy for actually believing he had received a letter from the future. Emma suddenly remembered something and told him there was something she wanted to give him. She pulled out 2 potions, prompting Ian to ask what they were. She explained that they were presence-erasing drugs, a new product she had been working on, and asked him to test one out to see if it worked. Curious, Ian grabbed one of the potions and asked if drinking it would make him invisible. Emma clarified that it wouldn't make him invisible, just erase his presence. Without hesitation, he opened the bottle and drank it immediately. Emma was shocked, shouting at him, demanding to know what he was doing. After swallowing, he made a face and told her it tasted awful. Furious, she yelled at him for drinking it so carelessly, reminding him that it was valuable. Then, without warning, she attacked him. With a bruised eye, he asked if he was right in assuming that all he needed to do was check if it worked or not. He then suggested she close her eyes for a second while he hid. Annoyed but intrigued, Emma agreed, saying that more test results would be useful. She closed her eyes and focused, attempting to sense his presence. The potion's effect kicked in, and Ian was shocked when he realized he couldn't even feel his own existence. It was as if he had turned into a ghost. Excited, he playfully swung his hand in front of Emma, thinking that if he could remain silent while hiding, this ability would give him a tremendous advantage in the hunting festival. However, before he could enjoy his newfound stealth, Emma suddenly reached out and grabbed his clothes, causing the potion's effect to vanish instantly. Ian stammered in disbelief, asking how she had found him. She let go, making him stumble and slam onto the floor. Without hesitation, she told him that it was a no-go. Ian, still confused, asked what she meant and why it didn't work. She bluntly told him that it was because of his body odor. Completely embarrassed, he asked her what she meant by that. Emma explained that everyone has a unique scent that they themselves can't detect, and it hadn't crossed her mind when she tested the potion on herself. Ian, still flustered, quickly opened the door and told her good luck with her project. He then muttered to himself, wondering why he had even been worried about her when she was already insanely strong. Emma called after him, asking if he was heading back. He replied that now that he knew she was fine, he would drink the other test tube in the forest and report back to her later. Before he could leave, she suddenly seemed to remember something and told him not to go into the forest alone until the hunting festival. If he really had to, she insisted that he call her first. She reminded him that, as he already knew, the monsters there had been behaving strangely lately. She then smiled sweetly and added that this was the perfect time to put him to good use. Ian sighed, agreeing, and told her that since he was free, she should put him to good use. Later, Ian returned to his dorm room and saw another message placed on his desk. Frustrated, he crumpled it up, angrily demanding to know who the hell kept sending him these letters. Lying down on his bed, he reassured himself that Emma would be fine since he had already warned her not to go alone. Before he could relax, Leto suddenly burst into his room, furious. He demanded to know where Ian had run off to earlier, complaining that thanks to him, he had been stuck calming down an enraged Celine. Ian sat up and asked Leto if it had been him. He then grumbled about how much Emma had mocked him because of the letters. Leto, confused, asked what he was talking about. What letters? Had he gone to see Emma? And how was she doing? Ian decided to brush it off, thinking that, for once, Leto had actually managed to hold things together. Annoyed, he then shouted at Leto not to bring up someone dying again next time because it was too much. Leto, completely caught off guard, stared at him in shock. He then shouted back, reminding Ian that all he had asked was how Emma was doing. He demanded to know why Ian was suddenly talking nonsense. In the trash can, the discarded letter lay crumpled. Its contents read, "It all started with Emma, a student from the alchemy department, gathering medicinal herbs. She was suddenly attacked by an unknown monster and was later found with her stomach ripped open." Leto once again asked Ian how Emma was doing. Ian, without hesitation, replied that Emma was fine. How could Emma not be fine? Yet at that moment, he didn't realize Emma was already in the forest, with her stomach torn open. The next day at the church, Emma lay in bed, teetering between life and death as the saintess worked to heal her body. Ian and Leto knelt beside her, praying alongside the saintess. When she finished, the saintess turned to them and explained that Emma had been found at the entrance of the forest. According to the scouts, it was likely the work of a monster. She added that monsters rarely appeared in that area, which meant Emma must have let her guard down. However, drinking a potion that made her appear dead after she was wounded had ultimately saved her life. Ian, desperate, told the saintess that if it was her divine power, then she could save Emma. But she calmly explained that divine power was not all-powerful. She said that if they could provide something of great value as an offering, they might be able to perform a miracle. Frustrated, Ian angrily reminded her that an herbalist's daughter wouldn't have access to such valuable resources. The saintess, unfazed, clarified that the offering wasn't about monetary value, but about the difficulty of obtaining it in the first place. Unfortunately, she told them, they had to prepare themselves for the worst. She then informed them that Emma's father would be arriving soon. It would be difficult to explain the situation to him, so if they wished to entrust that task to the clergy, they could leave now. Ian, however, refused. He insisted on staying, saying that he was the last person to see Emma before the attack, and that he had to be the one to tell her father. It might be their last chance to speak. The saintess reassured him that it was no one's fault and urged him not to blame himself. She then prays to regain her peace of mind before leaving. Leto, overcome with rage, suddenly punched the wall and shouted, demanding to know why a monster had appeared at the entrance of the forest. He cried out that if it hadn't been there, Emma could have escaped. Ian was about to calm him down when they both heard a broken voice calling out for Emma. Turning around, Ian saw an old man sobbing, calling for his daughter. The sight made Ian's heart sink. Ian hesitantly asked if he was Emma's father. The man, barely holding himself together, looked up and asked if Ian knew his daughter. Emma's father fell to his knees, begging Ian to help them, to at least let him see Emma's face. But for hygiene and safety reasons, the priests wouldn't allow it. There was nothing Ian could do. He clenched his fists, thinking that if only they had powerful backing, if only they had the money for an offering, maybe they could have done something. But for countryside nobles like them, all they could do was tell Emma's father that the priests were doing everything they could to heal her. After Emma's father calmed down a little, Ian pulled out a potion. He explained that Emma had given it to him just yesterday, telling him that it was a new potion she was proud to have developed. He said that rather than keeping it himself, Emma's father should be the one to hold on to his daughter's achievement. However, Emma's father refused. Instead, he grabbed Ian's shoulder and begged him to use it. In exchange, he pleaded with him never to forget Emma. Ian stood there, asking himself if there was truly nothing he could do. He thought that he could have prevented all of this. If only he had taken the letter more seriously. If only he had given Emma a clearer warning before he left. He didn't know if the letter was truly from the future, or if the events written in it were real, but he knew one thing. Something about it felt impossible to ignore. Determined, he made a decision. He would find Sepia, the one who wrote the letters, and make sure that the events described in them never came to pass. The next day, Leto gave him a puzzled look and asked who Sepia was, and if Ian had finally gotten a girlfriend. Leto added that he never thought he'd see the day Ian showed interest in a woman. Annoyed, Ian shoved Leto's face away and told him to stop rambling. He reminded him that he had already said he needed to find the person who wrote the letters. Leto asked if he had checked the student register. Ian replied that he had, but there was no record of anyone named Sepia. Leto then teasingly remarked that the name Sepia might be fake and wondered what kind of woman was making Ian that anxious. Ian, irritated, shouted that it was nothing like that and questioned why he would be anxious. Frustrated, he added that there was simply something he wanted to ask Sepia. However, Leto continued teasing, asking if Ian intended to ask Sepia to be his girlfriend, which angered him even more and led him to hit Leto. After getting smacked, Leto finally agreed to stop teasing and instead asked if he was correct in thinking that Sepia was the name of a flower. Ian confirmed this, explaining that it was why he wasn't sure whether it was a real name or an alias. Leto speculated that it was likely a nickname related to the sepia flower and mentioned that the name was fairly common in the north, suggesting that the person might be from that region. Hearing this, Ian suddenly realized something and wondered if the north wasn't the territory of the Yurdana family. Leto then offered to ask around, but noted that if Ian was referring to someone from the north, only one person came to mind. Turning to his side, Leto gestured towards someone and remarked that Ian's crazy fan was standing right over there. Ian followed Leto's gaze and saw Saria hiding behind a tree, staring at him. Ian admitted that Saria was the first person he thought of when the north was mentioned. Leto pointed out that the only noble family he knew from the snow-covered north was the Yurdanas. However, Leto couldn't understand why Saria would send a letter under a fake name instead of just speaking to him directly. Frustrated, he shouted at Leto to leave. Approaching Saria, Ian was about to speak when she shyly handed him a bag, explaining that it was compensation for teaching her. When Ian opened it, he was shocked to see a large amount of gold inside. Bewildered, he questioned what she meant by compensation, knowing that the gold was worth far more than expected. Saria explained that after asking for his guidance previously, she realized it was bad manners not to offer something in return. Ian reassured her that it wasn't rude at all and insisted that he couldn't possibly accept such a large amount. Curious, he then asked why she was so desperate for his guidance. Saria responded that she didn't believe she had anything left to learn from anyone else. Ian briefly thought she had matured, but he quickly realized that this behavior was likely only in front of him. Saria further explained that there was always something to learn from people who had yet to be surpassed. Ian reminded her that he didn't have the ability to teach someone like her and asked if she wasn't already progressing well on her own. He added that, even without his guidance, he was sure she would reach greater heights on her own one day. However, Saria simply stated that if she missed that year's hunting festival, she wouldn't have another chance. At that moment, Ian recalled that the letter mentioned Sepia also participating in that year's hunting festival. Before Saria could finish speaking, he grabbed her shoulders and firmly stated that they should train together. Inwardly, he resolved to find out if Saria was Sepia. Days later, Ian started training with Saria, but despite his efforts, he still couldn't determine whether she was Sepia. However, he learned other things about her. First, Saria had no social skills. She had earned the nickname Rude Yurdina, but not because she had any ill intent. She was simply terrible at interacting with others. Second, Saria didn't understand the concept of rest. Ian had heard that high-ranking nobles often trained without breaks by relying on healing potions. He soon realized that Saria was one of those people. One day, Saria injured herself during training. Ian immediately asked if she was okay, but she dismissed the concern, stating that a single potion would heal the wound. Ian, however, grabbed her injured leg and questioned whether she truly understood that potions were not a cure-all. He explained that they did not relieve the tension and fatigue in her joints, which was why proper pacing during training was necessary. Recalling something she had mentioned earlier, he asked if it was true that this year was her last chance. He wanted to understand what exactly she meant by that and why it was causing her so much anxiety. Saria hesitated before replying that there was someone in the 4th year she wanted to defeat. Ian pointed out that just because that person was graduating, it didn't mean it was the end. She could always meet them again and challenge them to a match if she had to. After finishing the bandage on her leg, Saria quietly admitted that the more time passed, the fewer opportunities she had to challenge them. Ian, confused, asked what she meant by that. Saria took a deep breath and explained that if she were to challenge the head of her family, she would be exiled immediately. Ian, shocked, questioned whether he was thinking correctly about who she intended to fight. Saria confirmed that she wanted to defeat the top student of the 4th year swordsmanship department, Delphine Yurdina. She then revealed that Delphine was her half-sister and would become the head of the Yurdina family after graduation. Looking at Ian, Saria asked if it was true that he had said she would still have a chance to challenge Delphine even after she graduated. Ian affirmed it. However, Saria shook her head and stated that it wasn't true, explaining that the academy was the only place where a direct heir and a branch family member could be judged equally.